Shana Tova. Several people asked me, since circumstances prevented them from either being at or watching the live stream of our Rosh HaShanah services, if I would share my sermon with them. And so Rosh HaShanah is past, but I'm now going to deliver my sermon without a mask. On Rosh HaShanah, I was wearing a mask for those who wish to see it. It's a new world, or so wrote Amerigo Vespucci, the explorer from Florence, Italy, to a friend. He was positing the theory that the land discovered a few years before by Christopher Columbus was not, as Columbus thought, the edges of Asia. No, wrote Amerigo to his friend, this is a whole new continent. He was right. And so the New World bears his name, America. Vespucci's language has become part of our vernacular. Not only do we still, 500 years later, refer to America as the New World as compared to Europe as the Old World, but the idea that there can be more than one world, that we can somehow divide and identify one world versus another world by a moment in time or a place, is a concept and a phrase that we hear all the time. We talk about an agricultural world and a post-industrial world, about a first world and a third world, the world of the internet, and so many more. Sometimes a new world can be created just by the changing of traditions and cultural norms, as Tevye tells Golder when their daughter comes to them and asks to marry a man of her choosing. Tevye replies, it's a new world, Golda, a new world. Love. And lately, there is the world before COVID and the world of COVID. It's become how many of us mark events and mark time. People say things to me like, I was thinking about a career change and I was going to start sending out resumes right around March, and then it was a new world. Or we had plans to go to Israel this summer, and then the world turned upside down. Or I was thinking about taking a trip with my grandchildren, but not in this world. I get it. I get it. So much has changed that it feels like a new world. But today is Rosh HaShanah, and we are reminded that there is only one world, the one that God created, and whose anniversary of creation we celebrate on this day. In fact, in none of those examples I mentioned was a new world actually created or discovered. Despite Vespucci's catchy writing, and that we still use the phrase today, Columbus did not discover a new world. His eyes were simply opened to the fact that the world he was living in had a lot more land than anyone previously thought. And so too, with all those other examples, the world is the world. There is only one, and it belongs to God, and we occupy it. But Rabbi, you say, I see a different world now than I did last Rosh HaShanah. I feel like it's a different world than it was last Rosh HaShanah. Yes, for me too, and I don't much like it either. When choosing the Torah portions for today, the rabbis were keenly aware that we would inevitably make comparisons between our lives last Rosh HaShanah and this Rosh HaShanah. In fact, that may be why they did not choose the obvious Torah reading that we should read on the birthday of creation, the birthday of the world, which is, of course, the story of creation in Genesis. Instead, they chose stories that involve someone's perception changing completely and how they integrate their own perceived new world into their lives. In today's Torah portion, we read about Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, mother of Abraham's child Ishmael. Now exiled and wandering in the desert, she laments the inability to give her baby water. She places the child under a shrub and walks away so that she doesn't have to hear his pathetic cries as he perishes. It is a pathetic scene. But then God appears and tells her, don't despair. The boy will grow to be a great nation. And then we are told, God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled her pouch and she gave the boy to drink. Now, what do you think happened? Did a well suddenly appear miraculously? It's possible, right? The Torah does those kinds of things. It's not above that kind of miracle taking place on Hagar's behalf. But the language of the verse catches our attention. God opens her eyes. Isn't it more likely that the well was there all along? But Hagar's despair and depression, her hopelessness, took away her ability to see that her salvation was right in front of her all along. That is why the text carefully tells us not that a well appears, but that God opened her eyes. The world did not change, just Hagar's perception of it. Tomorrow, we will read the binding of Isaac, another troubling story in which Abraham believes that God has commanded him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham brings Isaac to Mount Moriah, where the sacrifice is to take place. He puts Isaac upon the altar and he raises up the knife for the killing blow, and just then an angel appears and says, Abraham, Abraham, do not stretch forth your hand to the boy, nor do the slightest thing to him. And Abraham lifted his eyes, and lo, there was a ram caught by its horns in a tree. And Abraham sacrificed the ram instead of Isaac. So I ask you, was the ram there all along? It certainly seems so. It's described as stuck in the tree. Imagine a ram stuck in a tree, struggling, thrashing around, mewing its protest at its predicament. But Abraham was so focused on his perceived mission, maybe because the thing was so terrible and terrifying, that he was just pushing through it, and he doesn't see that an alternative is right there in front of him, thrashing about, making noise. Abraham doesn't see it. It isn't until Abraham's eyes are lifted that he understands God didn't want him to sacrifice Isaac. No, God wanted Isaac, but as a servant, as God intends for all Jewish children. Upon that realization, Abraham sees not only an alternative sacrifice, but better understands his own purpose in the world. The world did not change, but in that moment, Abraham became aware that he has a special role in it, a role to make it better, to make sure children stop dying in the name of holiness, as other religions at that time taught, and instead bring holiness into the world through tikkun olam in all of its many facets, including teaching our children and raising them up to have a positive impact on the world. So brilliantly does Abraham come to fulfill this mission now that he understands his role, that we sometimes even say that the world existed pre-Abraham and another after he lived and brought monotheism into it. And so too with us at this moment. We are not literally living in a new world. This is the world that God created for us to live in. And with all of its beauty and opportunities to experience holiness and love and delight, it also comes with troubles and sadness, mystery and anxiety. Disease is not new in this world, any more than is hunger, depression, war, death, or despair. Racism and disparities in the way people are treated based on the color of their skin, that existed before this past spring. But many of us didn't see it so clearly. The world is the same, but our eyes have opened and it looks different now. Now is the time for us, like our ancestors, to reevaluate our role in this world. When we accept that the world is the same, but actually works differently than we thought, when we recognize that we have been sheltered from certain realities, we can also more clearly perceive our role in the world. When their eyes were opened, Hagar and Abraham did not hesitate. When Hagar's eyes are open, she acts immediately. She picks herself up out of the dust. She gives her son water, and she makes it possible for him to continue on with his God-given mission to become a great nation. When Abraham lifts up his eyes and perceives the world as it really is, he too acts immediately. He takes the ram and he sacrifices it, committing an act of holiness, of drawing God's presence into the world, fulfilling both his God-given purpose and Isaac's. In both these cases, the main characters don't lament what they did not see before. They don't despair over past mistakes or even over their own situation. When their eyes are open, they act to protect others and bring holiness into the world. And my friends, that remains our mission today. This is not a new world, but it is a new you. The example of our ancestors is clear when faced with the harsh realities of this world, a world of disease and hunger, racial injustice, unemployment, and more. Our job is to call out the beauty, to highlight the sacred, and to serve God by serving God's creation. Though I know it may be our instinct, this is not the time to turn inward, the time to circle the wagons and focus inward on ourselves. Our faith teaches us again and again, by example after example, that we were created for moments just like this one, that we have a role, and it is to go out into the world and make it better. And yes, to do so safely, to do so carefully, because that's the world we live in, but to make sure we are doing it in every way we can. That is our mission. When all of this started, I found myself saying, perhaps hopefully, that the universal nature of this pandemic would be uniting. It would bring us all together. But now we realize that this has affected people differently, often depending on factors like their health, their age, their socioeconomic status. But what has always connected us in our history is not what has happened to us. We could define ourselves by what's happened to us as the Jewish people. We've had a lot happen to us. But what's defined us, what has brought us together, what has united us, has always been how we've responded. From Abraham to Sarah in Canaan to WJC in Mamaroneck. We now must be connected in our communal response to the demands of this moment. In the new Jewish year 5781, not only do we perceive the world differently, we are now capable of perceiving what this world needs from us more clearly. The world of 5781 demands our empathy. The world of 5781 demands that we express gratitude to call out the beauty that is still all around us, though sometimes hidden by the darkness. The world of 5781 demands our tzedakah, recognizing that no matter how bad things have gotten, there is someone out there who has it worse and who needs our help. My friends, on this day of creation, in this world that is new to us, whether we like it or not, we have eaten of the apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We stand naked like Adam and Eve before the reality of the world we now perceive, the world we have been complicit in creating. Let us clothe ourselves again in mitzvot, in dedication to others, in empathy and caring, in outreach and concern for the other, so that when next Rosh HaShanah comes, Meretz Hashem, we can stand truly together, perceiving a world made lighter and brighter, healthier and happier, because we acted, because we fulfilled our mission. Our eyes are now open, my friends. Now is the time to open our hearts. Shana Tova.